A Tale About the Sun. Once there was a great dark country by the sea. In that country the sun never rose, and its people never once saw sunshine in all of their lives. A black cloud covered the land, and there was so little light that the people could hardly see each other. They called this place the Land of Darkness, and its people were known as hut dwellers, because they had no houses to live in, but only ramshackle huts. These huts were made of straw and covered with tree bark and moss, and it wasn't surprising that the harsh wind blew right through them. The people in the Land of Darkness were very poor indeed. Nevertheless, in the middle of the country there was a big round hill, and on that hill was a huge forest. In the heart of the forest stood a log house, and inside that log house it was warm and comfortable, and the tables were always laid with the most delicious food and drink. It was the only log house in the whole country, and in it lived 70 shadowy siblings. All around the hill there was a high fence, and inside the fence were 100,000 reindeer. The shadowy siblings didn't make the reindeer work, but all the same, they never let the hut dwellers have a single one of them. Life went on like this for 1,000 years, and then for another 1,000, and then for another 1,000 after that. The hut dwellers thought that unless the winter finally came to an end, things would never change. One day, however, riding on the back of a beautiful reindeer, an old man appeared in the Land of Darkness. His beard grew down to his knees, and his eyes shone so brightly that his face could clearly be seen even in the dark. He was as tall as a giant, and looked as wise as an owl. As soon as he opened his mouth, the hut dwellers fell silent. "My friends, you live in darkness because you don't know what the sun is. But even though you've never seen it, the sun exists. And if you can capture a piece of it, your land will become bright and warm." Of course, the hut dwellers had never even heard of such a wonderful thing. What on earth could this sun be, they asked each other. The shadowy siblings also heard the old man talking. As they listened, they became furious, and they shouted at the hut dwellers angrily. "You people are so stupid! Why should you pay any attention to a stranger's crazy tales? How could anything exist if nobody has ever seen it? The old fake only wants to fool you. You shouldn't listen to him. You should beat him black and blue." The hut dwellers thought hard about this. Maybe the shadowy siblings were right. Maybe it would be a good idea to kill the stranger. The wise old man simply stood there shaking his head. Now the light in his eyes had gone out, and the next moment he rode away on his magic reindeer and vanished from sight. Only his voice could be heard in the darkness. "After this, I will only appear to those who believe in the sun." Before long, all the hut dwellers had completely forgotten about the stranger's visit. All except for one young man, who was very proud and very brave. Although he was as poor as everybody else, this young man never bowed down before the shadowy siblings, and one day he walked to a place where thick moss grew as far as the eye could see. As he gazed up at the dark sky, he said to himself, "I do believe the sun truly exists. But how can I find that wise old man?" As soon as he had spoken, the moss burst open, and the old man's magic reindeer appeared before him. "Jump on my back," it cried. The young man climbed up onto the reindeer's back, and it carried him away over the moss and the marshes and the deep dark lakes until all of a sudden it stopped in front of a huge rock. On top of the rock sat the wise old man. "Welcome, my boy," he smiled. "I knew that one of the hut dwellers would come looking for me. You are a brave young man, and you have a great future ahead of you." "Thank you," replied the young man. "But tell me, where can I find a piece of the sun?" "You've still got a lot of work to do yet. First you have to ask each of the hut dwellers for a single hair from their heads, and then, with those hairs, you must weave a basket." The young man returned home, and he spoke so convincingly that every last one of the hut dwellers gave him a hair from their head. When he had collected all of the hairs, he began to weave his basket. He worked for 70 days and 70 nights, and by the end, he had not only managed to weave a tiny basket, he had also grown in strength and wisdom. The very next day, he went back to the place where the thick moss grew. Once more, he gazed up at the dark sky, and now he said to himself, "My basket is finished, but how can I capture a piece of the sun?" As soon as he had spoken, the moss burst open and the magic reindeer appeared before him a second time. "Jump on my back," it cried. The wise young man climbed up onto the reindeer's back, and it carried him away over the moss and the marshes and the deep dark lakes. They had been travelling for a long time, when all of a sudden the young man spotted a glowing red light on the horizon, and for the first time in his life he saw something that all the rest of his people didn't even believe in: the sun. Just then the magic reindeer spoke. "Aren't you afraid of fire?" it asked. "I'm not afraid of anything," answered the young man. "Then open up your basket and hold on to it tightly, and hold on to me too." The young man did as he was told, and the next moment they raced off towards the horizon. Gathering speed, the magic reindeer ran straight into the sun, pricking it with its antlers so that a piece came off and fell into the basket. Then they immediately turned back and hurried straight to the land of darkness. The moment they got there, the magic reindeer disappeared. The wise young man stood before the hut dwellers and spoke to them. "You all gave me one of your hairs. I wove a basket from them, and in that basket I captured a piece of the sun and brought it home to you. Now we must let the sun out of the basket so that it can light up the sky." Just as he said this, however, he heard shouting behind him. He spun around and saw the shadowy siblings hurrying down from their hill. They were shaking their fists and yelling angrily, "Don't you dare! You mustn't let the sun out of your basket. Our lakes will dry out. The iron in the belly of the earth will melt and flood our homes. You'll be blinded, and we will all be burned alive." Before he could get away, the shadowy siblings had surrounded the young man, trying to snatch the basket from him. Now the hut dwellers started shouting too. "Leave him alone! That basket's ours!" Red in the face with rage, the shadowy siblings grabbed hold of the young man and began dragging him towards the marsh. When they saw that the siblings were planning to drown both the young man and the sun in his basket, for the first time in their lives, the hut dwellers rose up. The next moment, a thunderstorm of stones rained down on the bullies' heads, but in reply, the shadowy siblings took out sharpened fish bones and started to stab the hut dwellers. The fighting was fierce and bloody. Just as he was about to be pushed into the water, the young man threw the basket high in the air. As it sailed over the battlefield, the basket's lid flew open, and the first of the sun's rays came streaming out. A glowing red light filled the sky as dawn broke over the land. The shadowy siblings all burnt to death, and while their ashes disappeared into the marsh, the young man and the hut dwellers stood gazing up at the dazzling sunshine with huge smiles on their faces. The water of the deep dark lakes turned blue. The dull moss turned red, white, yellow, and green. A miracle had come to the land of darkness. Now the young man was surrounded again, but this time by happy hut dwellers. "Who are you?" they cried. "Who is the wise man who has brought us this miracle?" "Now do you believe that the sun truly exists?" asked the young man. "We do," they shouted, "but you've given us only a tiny piece of it. How can we capture the whole thing?" As they said this, the moss burst open, and the magic reindeer appeared. It said something to the young man, and then he turned and spoke to the hut dwellers. "Go to the hill. Pull down the shadowy siblings' fence. Herd up all the reindeer. They are yours now." The hut dwellers did just as he had told them. First, they destroyed the fence, and then they each brought one of the 100,000 reindeer down from the hill. When they were all there, the wise young man jumped onto the back of the magic reindeer. "Mount up and follow me," he called. They rode over the moss and the marshes and the lakes, and when they had finally reached the sun, the young man turned to the hut dwellers. "Aren't you afraid of fire?" he asked. "We're not afraid of anything," they replied. "Just tell us how to capture the sun." "Ride towards it with an open heart, and let a ray of its light enter you." So the hut dwellers rode towards the sun with their hearts open wide. They each let a ray of sunlight enter them, and their 100,000 hearts grew suddenly warm. "Now line your reindeer up," said the young man. When they were ready, the magic reindeer pricked the sun with its antlers, and the sun slid down from the sky and settled on the antlers of all the other reindeer. The 100,000 hut dwellers rode home very carefully, carrying the sun before them. Since that day, the sun has been shining red over the land. The lakes are blue, and the hut dwellers catch fish in the sparkling water. Where once were marshes, there are now brightly colored flowers and green grass. Endless forests whisper on the seashore. The wise young man still lives, and he will never die, because he was the one who brought the miracle of the sun to the land of darkness.